Did you know that 31% of battlefield bleeding comes from the extremities? My purpose today is to explain the importance of the combat tourniquet and how it can be used to prevent a large number of trauma-related deaths. I will attempt to help you understand the different ways to use and apply tourniquets, as well as the reason behind them. According to Emergency Care by Daniel Limber and Michael F. O'Keefe, a tourniquet is a device that closes off all blood flow to and from an extremity. Although in the past, tourniquets were thought to be a last resort, now they are a well-known emergency care option when the bleeding can no longer be controlled by direct pressure or a pressure bandage. Before recent developments, it was thought that the application of a tourniquet would always result in the amputation of the affected arm or leg. Although the risks of a tourniquet are still present, it could definitely save someone's life. Deciding to use a tourniquet will increase the chance of survival by stopping the casualty from losing too much blood, but if bleeding can be controlled by a pressure bandage, a tourniquet is not necessary. Although a tourniquet may seem simple to apply, there are still some guidelines to follow. Tourniquets can only be used on an extremity and cannot be applied over a joint. A tourniquet should be applied approximately 2 inches above the wound and 2 inches above or below the joint, depending on the location of the wound. Learning to apply a tourniquet may seem simple at first, but after a while it comes as second nature. After briefly discussing the use and guidelines for applying a tourniquet, I'm going to show you the basic parts of a tourniquet and how they work. There are several different types of tourniquets, but the U.S. Army currently supplies its soldiers with the CAT tourniquet, which stands for Combat Application Tourniquet. This tourniquet comes packaged with instructions in case you forget what you're doing under intense pressure. This particular tourniquet and instructions are manufactured by Composite Resources, Inc. It includes instructions on how to apply the tourniquet with one hand or with 2 hands. You would apply the tourniquet with 2 hands if you're applying it on someone else or on your own leg, and with one hand if you're applying it to your own arm or if you're incapable of using 2 hands. After reviewing the application procedure, you can begin to apply the tourniquet to your casualty. Your casualty may or may not be conscious. They will most likely be in shock, if not from the trauma, then from the extreme blood loss. First, you would have to remove any clothing or debris that would prevent the tourniquet from becoming extremely tight. Unwind the tourniquet and wrap it around the wounded extremity. On a casualty's leg, it is essential that you go through both loops, but on the arm, only one loop is necessary to keep it tight. First, you would place the tourniquet through the inside slit, and then through the outside slit. After going through both slits, you want to pull the Velcro as tight as possible. It's easier if you stick one finger inside to keep the Velcro from sticking to each other. Tighten the tourniquet as much as possible without using the rod. After securing the Velcro, take the rod and tighten it as much as you possibly can. And then secure it under the clasp. You can check the tourniquet's effectiveness by checking to see if the blood has stopped flowing or checking the casualty's pulse. You can check their radial pulse directly underneath their thumb on their wrist. If the pulse is still present, the tourniquet is not tight enough and the blood is still flowing. If the blood continues to flow, you can either tighten the tourniquet and recheck the pulse and check for bleeding, or you can apply a second tourniquet above the wound to make sure the bleeding definitely stops. Make sure that you mark the casualty with the time that you applied the tourniquet to help the next higher medically skilled people to be able to determine the next life-saving measure. If the tourniquet is left on too long, it may result in an amputation. Tourniquets are so important that a letter from Colonel Holcomb to the U.S. forces recommended that one be carried by every soldier to prevent battlefield deaths. Applying a tourniquet can not only save a life in the battlefield, but also if you get severely injured in the middle of nowhere. Bleeding from the extremities is a common cause of battlefield death, but with the intervention of tourniquets, it can be greatly decreased. Even though tourniquets are an excellent life-saving device, bleeding can often be controlled with direct pressure or a pressure bandage, and a tourniquet is not always necessary. Even if applying a tourniquet may seem easy to remember, follow the guidelines. Maybe someday, bleeding from the extremities will no longer be a leading cause of death on the battlefield.